I would love to go and see what's on the inside. We'll start on the MemoMind Ones in the left temple that doesn't have the button and see if we can get in and pry this open. And if we're careful and lucky, we'll have taken apart the front faceplate. We also have a black sticker that goes on top of the output of the waveguide. You'll see if I hit this button, the display engine turns on. Even though we get a lot of output to the user's eye, a lot of light is wasted at this input coupler. And so to hide that, a little black sticker goes a long way. We also see the main flex cable that connects all of the circuitry on either the left or the right temple to keep the displays in sync and showing you the same image whenever you're looking at both the left or the right eye. Next, we'll take apart the projector housing. And if we come on the back side here, having removed all of the glue on the actual projector housing, we can now see on the inside of our device. Pushing the button still shows that we're functional because we still see the green LED. On the inside, we have a very similar projector housing to what we've seen before in the Even Realities G2, with our micro display panel right here, injecting light into a small optical element, which then feeds that light into the waveguide that goes to your eye. Behind it, we have some other flex connections, as well as, of course, the anticipated glue that we see inside of the projector housing componentry, ultimately connecting to the flex cable that we see on the far left here. We'll first disconnect this flex cable before we try to take off the left temple and see what's inside the temple as well. And hopefully we'll also take a look at this display panel and see if we can find out which panel MemoMind is using here. Thankfully, this flex cable came undone pretty easily out of this glue without having to rip off any bond pads. Now, with this connector disconnected, we should be able to take off the entire left temple a little bit more cleanly coming in from the back side. This uses a T4 Torx screwdriver, and we can see that the temples are simply connected to the main body using this rigid pin system. And if we remove the main pin, which actually serves to receive the Torx screw, we can then finally take out our temple. There is one other really tricky connector that we have to remove here before we go any further, or else we risk making the entire unit non-functional when we try to reassemble this. So with heat, to again soften the glue that's embedded in the flex connector, and thankfully we were able to very cleanly remove the left temple from the main body. Another important detail about the MemoMind is that the inside of the very thin frames is actually overmolded with likely some sort of polyurethane. I doubt it's a silicone, but nevertheless a very soft material, which contributes to how comfortable these are compared to just the bare titanium that we see on something like the G2s. While this is nice for ultra lightweight and structural rigidity, for comfort, you do want something a little bit softer, like what MemoMind has put on the inside here. To continue disassembly of our temples, we'll again continue to heat up, this time the rear end of the temple, and see if we can wedge in at the seam a plastic spudger. With a little help from a not-so-plastic spudger, we can finally get a shim in here, being careful not to puncture the battery module that is immediately under this half of the rear temple. And when we open this up slightly, we can see that we can now put in our spudger element. Once we've gotten this far, we can peel apart the inner cover. Having opened up the left temple, we can see that there's a battery seated right behind the left audio module with a flex cable that runs on top of the audio module all the way to the front, ultimately connecting back to our display in the left side of our frames. Now, what's interesting to see is that we actually have a metal can battery, not a lithium-ion pouch cell like we've seen in a lot of these other glasses. Tough to actually remove this battery completely, but we were able to pry it up. We can actually see that we are working with a 170 milliamp hour. We'll take a look at this battery and see exactly who the manufacturer is. But these metal can batteries are a unique style of battery that we haven't really seen in any other glass besides the Meta Ray-Ban displays, which is also a very, very different type of metal can battery than the one we see here. Pretty cool to see. If we take a look at what the MemoMind team has been able to pack into these temples, I am incredibly impressed. On the far left, we see the battery module that powers the device, a 170 milliamp hour capacity. Strange number, but we'll get to that later. As well as the speaker module and the flex cable that connects everything to the rest of the device. Now, we can pull off this battery partially, and one of the more interesting things that we're seeing is that they've actually soldered the PCB that has the battery controller onto the actual battery can itself. Again, this is going to be almost impossible to repair this device if you ever need to change out the battery, and it basically means that this is just going to become waste. We've also soldered down the audio module to a small little PCB that comes off of this long flex cable, and we can see the speaker positive and negative terminals in the far left here. Again, to reach this level of component density, we have to typically get very, very aggressive with how much we glue in, with how much we solder down, and MemoMind is no exception. To get to that 48 grams that we measured, they've made a lot of sacrifices in ultimately the repairability of a unit like this to make sure that no extra gram of material is included in there. Next, we'll do the same on the right temple to remove the projector housing and disconnect the display from the main flex, allowing us to take off the right temple. And after a little bit of heat and some alcohol, we can remove the projector housing. If we zoom in, we can see pretty much what we saw on the left side, which is a lot of glue holding all the board-to-board connectors very tightly to each other, given the small volume that we have to work in here. Again, we'll have to heat these up before we try and disconnect them. Otherwise, we risk ripping off the board-to-board connectors like we did in the Even Realities. And finally, the second one holding in our right temple. Now, moving back to our Torx screwdriver, we can remove the screw holding our pivot pin in place. First, taking out the actual screw, and then by pushing into the hole, we can start removing the pin which holds in place the temple, ultimately loosening the temple from the frame of our device. We now have the two temples removed from the frame, so we can put that to the side and also open up the right temple, same as we did the left. We have to be careful when opening up this temple because we do see a flex connector between the inner part of our temple and the outer part, likely connecting the charging points that we have for that proprietary connector. So before we go any further, we can come to the other side, again using a healthy amount of heat to soften any adhesive that may have been put in our board-to-board connector and loosen that before finally prying apart the two halves. We can see again a small battery on this side that complements the 170 milliamp hour on the left side, likely a 40 milliamp hour, but we'll check, as well as the principal PCB that helps drive all of the componentry that we've talked about so far, and a nice connector, which does not seem to actually be glued in place, going from the main board to our right display. If we zoom in, we can actually see that this is a 60 milliamp hour module, meaning that the total battery capacity that we have in the MemoMind ones is 230 milliamp hour, a significant boost over many other smart glasses of this form factor, which typically top out somewhere around 180, which means we have roughly 50% more battery capacity than most other designs like this, which typically top out around 180 milliamp hours. It explains why, despite having a pretty power consumptive audio module on top of our display, MemoMind is able to actually get a very, very long all-day battery for this device. One thing that I found very interesting about this particular design is the density of the PCB is now all pretty much contained in this right rear temple. If we unplug the main flex connector connecting to the right side of our frame, and with a little bit of help from Movie Magic, remove the microphone that is glued in place at the very rear of the temple, we can lift up the small little 60 milliamp hour battery that is again soldered on to our main PCB, which is again soldered on to our audio module. And if we lift up the rear, we obviously see some hidden goodies on the PCB on the back side. However, what's really interesting to see is the stacked design that MemoMind used here. And in fact, if we lift again the PCB out of the way, we can see that this is actually two separate dual-sided PCBs vertically stacked using this plastic spacer. It now explains why we're also getting so much heat in this area when we have the device working at, I would say, heavy usage. But it is essentially so much componentry all packed into the same small little volume. Very, very incredible what can be done these days with this type of device. In the incredibly small volume that we have in each temple housing the display, we actually have quite a bit of connectors taking up most of that volume. This smaller one from the microphone that sits underneath our display and captures forward-facing audio. This larger one that connects to the main flex cable that traverses the entire frame is for the display. And then finally, this ultimate connector here is what gives all the power and data back through to your temples as we charge or as we actually need to deliver more information from each temple to the displays or to the other side of the glass. It's always amazing to see just how much technology starts getting packed in to these small little devices. And now we're running into limits essentially of just how many things we have to connect down in these projector volumes. Very, very impressive. And then pop out the display. And when we pull out the display, what we're left with is this very familiar looking micro display that we may have seen before. If we take a look at the display pulled out of the Even Realities G2, we see basically we have the exact same monochrome green display from Jadebird 2. And then if we actually flip this over to read the flex cable from each of them, we see these are identical, likely down to the work week that each of these was produced. So much for supplier diversification. It looks like for lightweight glasses, the industry is still relying primarily on Jadebird. When it comes to the waveguide, we won't try to remove it this time. We know how that ends for this very thin type of sRG glass-based waveguide. While this type of surface relief grading waveguide is nothing new for this channel, we can still take a look at how it works
after we've removed the display from the left side temple. If we take our trusty green laser pointer, we can shine it into the projector optic that stays behind and see how the light is guided into the glass by total internal reflection, and then ultimately back out to your eye with these little dots that you see replicating that single dot that we enter in the projector optic multiple times to expand the field of view of the image, getting that up to 30 degrees field of view that we previously measured. Overall, pretty impressive look at these types of waveguides, and more impressive that we didn't end up breaking it. While we didn't really see a lot of innovative things when it comes to the display, projector, and waveguide combo in the MemoMind Ones, it was very impressive to see the new style of battery that is starting to be integrated here, this Reit Power battery, and how they've split the cells with a larger 170 milliamp hour cell on the left temple and a 60 milliamp hour cell on the right temple. That, coupled with the unique vertically stacked dual-sided PCBs, is really a testament to how far these engineers have to go to pack in so much capability into such a small form factor, and more importantly, a comfortable one that is relatively lightweight. These still are relatively heavy glasses compared to something like the Even Realities or the upcoming Nemo glasses, but with onboard audio, I think these check a lot of boxes for people who are really not that interested in cameras, but still like to have a heads-up display like I do for things like translation, transcription, and other similar types of features. That's about it for the MemoMind One teardown and analysis. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them down below, and I'll try to get to them soon. See you next time. Bye.